share a little bit about your own personal and professional background and what that journey has been like to bringing you where you are today?
I was born and raised in Toronto. But if I had to describe myself, I would say that I've always been a builder, whether it was a project in school or a school club or more recently a business. I've always just loved building things. So, when I think back to when I was a kid and I was 10 years old, and this is, back in 1998, right? So internet was still pretty new. My best friend started building websites and I said, oh, that's really neat. So then I would, after school, go home and start building websites. And then when I got into high school, I started doing more team-based things. So, ended up starting a couple of school clubs. And then when I got to university, ended up starting a blog, which I then eventually turned into a few small side businesses as well. And so I've always liked starting and building things since I was young. And I think a lot of that ended up motivating me to eventually do a real business, let's call it that, with SeamlessMD.
What do you think might have been the inspiration for building things? Like, what did your parents do? Who were around you when you first were interested in doing that?
I'll be honest, I wasn't surrounded by folks who, ran their own businesses or were kind of doing traditional entrepreneurial things. It's always been about just kind of following my curiosity. Growing up, if I followed my curiosity enough, a lot of times there weren't maybe many people doing those things. So then I just ended up doing them. So building a website, one friend doing it, but it wasn't something that every kid was doing. I have an obsessive personality in the sense that once I get really interested in something, I'm able to kind of just keep working on that topic or project for a long time. Once I started learning how to build websites, I became obsessed with, how do you build a website? What are the different tools that you can use? And then eventually something like Seamless. I mean, when you're building a larger organization, with dozens of people, there's so many things that you can keep learning. And so if you're like me, where you have an obsessive personality, there's an endless number of things that you could build at something.
So how do you decide where to focus now?
The only real, I'll call it, thing I'm building is Seamless. That's the only, whether you call it a project, a business or organization, that's the one thing that I'm building.
Yeah, and can you share a little bit about Seamless and the work you're doing now?
The way I describe Seamless is we provide a software platform that we sell to hospitals and health systems, and they use Seamless to engage, monitor, and stay connected with patients across different healthcare journeys. So a journey could be going through a heart surgery, or being guided through, before and after your knee replacement, or being guided through your chemotherapy treatment. We've started off doing a lot of work in surgery, but more recently we're doing a lot of non-surgery things. And later this year, we're doing work in, supporting the whole maternity care journey, supporting patients going through sepsis treatment and recovery. And our goal is over the next couple of years, we'll have hospital and health system partners who are using Seamless pretty much across the board for any major condition or procedure. And the way it works is patients get Seamless on their phone, their tablet, or their desktop computer, and they're guided throughout these journeys in just a much more interactive way. So a patient would get reminders of what to do at the right time, interactive education, such as, physiotherapy, exercise videos. But probably the most important thing we do is we empower patients to track their progress. So patients are tracking symptoms, pain scores, incision photos after surgery, and then back at the hospital, frontline staff such as nurses can get alerts and dashboards that monitor patients and catch problems earlier. And so we've had a lot of success with healthcare organizations in Canada and the US in terms of reducing recovery times, reducing ER visits, readmissions, saving costs. And kind of what's kind of been exciting lately has been, as awful as the pandemic has been for the world, as kind of an internal optimist, one of the silver linings that happened for us was that it created, a lot more adoption of Seamless, particularly in Ontario, than we were expecting going into 2020. And so the fact that we were able to make a difference during what's been such a difficult time for many has been a really positive thing for us.
And how did you get started with Seamless? Like, what was the initial problem you were trying to solve, and how long did it take you?
So, when I was in med school in Toronto, I never fell in love with a certain specialty. I mean, lots of people, they go in, they know exactly, they want to be a family physician or in cardiology or something. I didn't have that. I did, though, have some really great mentors who got me more interested in broader challenges in the healthcare system around quality, safety. And so I did work at UHN on preventing readmissions back to hospital. And then by the time I was in my last year of med school, I'd become really interested in this idea of, well, why can't we build technology to better engage and monitor a patient to prevent a readmission? Long story short, I met a couple of brilliant engineers and we decided to go and build that vision. So we started Seamless in my last year of med school and I graduated. I got into residency here in Toronto, but I actually never started it. And we decided to go full-time on Seamless, and it's been my full-time gig ever since.
Wow. So you haven't practiced as a physician?
I'm not even licensed to because I didn't do residency. But no, I actually have never practiced independently as a physician.
How did you decide to do medicine?
I did grow up, I think ever since high school, wanting to go into healthcare and medicine. And I would say though, when I was an undergrad, I had some, thoughts about whether I still should or shouldn't, because I love building stuff, but I didn't love being in the didactic classroom setting. And so in medicine early on, you have a lot of that, right? As for many professions. But by the time I was near the end of my undergrad, I still hadn't found something else yet. So I said, okay, well, I had done all this work to, be on this path to applying to medical school. So I might as well just go and do it. And I kind of luckily got in. But I think even during med school, I still always had that itch to build something. And so I thought that I would do something like Seamless down the road, maybe 5, 10 or more years after finishing my medical training. It was kind of by chance that journey started a lot earlier than I expected.
How quickly did you grow? Initially, it was you and you said another engineering friend. When did you start hiring other members and start growing the team?
Yeah, so we started with 3 of us, and I think we were maybe 4 or 5 within the first year. We had raised a little bit of capital a little bit before the end of our first year together. We'd gone through an incubator program called the Next 36 locally here in Toronto. So through that program, we had some great mentors and met some investors and raised a little bit of capital and started growing the team out. The big challenge was that, if you think back to 2013, 2014, using technology to engage patients and monitor patients, this is, 6-7 years before COVID, it was still a very new thing. And so it took a couple of years to, get our first, major reference partners. In healthcare, medical evidence is really important for adoption. It took several years to get, really good evidence showing that this could improve outcomes. And so we had a pretty small team early on proving these things out. And then I would say it's only more recent, the last couple of years, that we had kind of the footprint and the resources to really build out the team. And it's called turn into a business. Let's call it that.
What was your first partnership?
Yeah, it's funny. So even though, most of our early partners were in Ontario, our technically our first partner was Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. And that's a great story of entrepreneurship in the sense that at the time, we didn't have any partners. And so I actually just started Googling, well, who's working on preventing readmissions? And I found this paper about this team in Houston that had basically created a list of, symptoms that were common after colon surgery that could, be an early warning sign of potentially a readmission or a problem. And they had this kind of paper-based workflow of, okay, if a patient has this symptom, they should call in. If they have this symptom, they should go to the ER. And I just emailed the head surgeon of that group saying, hey, what if we could digitize that workflow so you could actually automate that with the patient on their device, maybe even monitor them. Is that compelling? And he said, okay, that's really interesting. And so, I didn't know this team or this person, hadn't met them in person, and just, virtually back then. And again, virtual wasn't a big thing back then for meetings, right? In healthcare at least, right? So met virtually and, started working together at some point. They were our first kind of pilot research study. And they kind of V1 of SeamlessMD way back when. And I think that just goes to show you that you don't need to have connections to make things happen. And yeah, did I email a lot of people before I got that first yes? Absolutely. Most people ignored us, but we were just, disciplined and just contacting as many people as possible.
That's such an amazing story. And I'm curious, do you feel it's harder to be an entrepreneur here in Canada? We hear a lot about, our Canadian startups, founders going over to US. There's so many more opportunities there. Like, what has your experience been like?
Yeah, and I can only speak from a healthcare context, so you take that for what it's worth. I think that the biggest challenge I've seen when it comes to healthcare innovation and entrepreneurship in Canada is the fact that there's a lot of misaligned incentives. There are a lot of great innovations or new products or solutions that help patients, that help providers. But the reality is that just because something helps someone in the healthcare system doesn't mean there's enough urgency for adoption. So, one of the challenges we had in Ontario when we started was that, we would work with hospitals here, and physicians would tell us, you know what, Josh, if we just prove that we can reduce readmissions and save money, of course the hospital will adopt this. Of course the executives will say we gotta buy this and grow this. And several times here early on, we would prove at the hospital, hey, we've reduced readmissions by over 50%. And then we'd present those results to the hospital CEO, and they would say, wow, Josh, that's phenomenal. But the way that healthcare is paid for in Ontario is that if we save money, the government thinks we need less money next year. Right. And so we actually don't get a real financial ROI, which is crazy to hear as not just as an entrepreneur, but as a patient in the system. And the difference was that in the US, two things. One was that Obamacare came out about, over 10 years ago. And one of the major things Obamacare did was it shifted a lot of the payment models in the US away from fee for service and more to pay for performance. And so in the US, for the first time, hospitals were getting penalized for high readmission rates. They were getting penalized for high infection rates. And so they had all these incentives to actually care about how well the patient did and how cost effective they could deliver care. And so there was an urgency in the US to more so to adopt something like Seamless. Also with the free market environment, there's competition for patient market shares. There's real competition for improving the patient experience. Very different than here in Canada. That being said, though, I would say things have really changed for us in 2020. Since COVID happened, the Ontario government has invested real dollars in accelerating adoption of digital remote technology solutions. And that's given us a big boost lately in the province and getting more adoption. So I would say, unfortunately, it's been a crisis in Ontario to kind of move ahead with this. But I think there's a lot of room for improvement in the incentive model to drive more adoption of innovation and good care here.